Yeah, we apologize. You know, we love China. We love playing there.
Blizzard Entertainment said it was banning Ying-Wei Chung, also known as Blitzchung, from its professional Hearthstone esports competition for a year. Blizzard is also withholding money he had already earned in the company's top-tier Grandmasters tournament, which Ing said in a Twitter message cost him $10,000 of prize earnings. The move was triggered when Ing, dressed in a gas mask and goggles in defiance of authorities' ban on face masks, used a slogan in support of Hong Kong's pro-democracy protesters during a post-match interview.
Why is it that the USA constantly is getting cucked by China? I mean, just recently you had the news of the Houston Rockets general manager profusely apologizing for previously stating that he supported pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. And then even more recently, you've got the news story of Blizzard banning one of its competitive Hearthstone players because they dared to say that they supported the same Hong Kong protesters. These are American companies, but they don't seem to embrace very American values. And this is hardly the first time that China's cucked America. China's run a massive trade deficit with the United States for decades at this point. All of these US-based companies just can't get enough of that big, thick, bulging Chinese customer base. For the elites who run these multinational corporations, things like loyalty, patriotism to their country, and belief in the truth of Enlightenment values apparently does not exist. These companies do not care about these things. In fact, the Chinese government shares a lot in common with these multinational corporations. They both love the idea of constant growth and making more and more money. That's how China runs its economy, and that's how these elites run their multinational corporations. The end goal isn't liberty. After all, Google wouldn't hesitate for a second to censor certain types of videos. I'm sure this video will not be available for people to watch if they live in China. What these multinational corporations can't stand, though, is the prospect of making less money. You would never, for example, see someone who worked for a Chinese company apologize to the people of the United States because they said something that was anti-democratic or offensive or anti-American. It would never happen. Why? Because the Chinese aren't cucks. They're actually loyal and patriotic, things that haven't been true of our multinational corporations for years. Now, for a lot of reasons, China doesn't really deserve all the loyalty and patriotism that its Chinese citizens give to it, because it abuses those citizens in a lot of different ways. It treats workers terribly, subjects them to dangerous work conditions just in order to make more money. You have entire cities in China where almost everyone living in the city has cancer because there's such bad environmental conditions. China regularly lies to its citizens, and it teaches them an incorrect version of history. And the government constantly spies on them, censors them, subjects them to surveillance, and now a social credit system. China is extremely heavy-handed when it comes to dealing with ethnic and religious minorities in the country, and oppresses Christians and Muslims. Yet most people living in China have a lot more loyalty and patriotism to their country than do the wealthy elite who live in the United States. Why are people who are so rich, who benefited so much from the system in the United States, were able to make so much money and be so much successful, why is it that these people have absolutely no loyalty to the United States, have absolutely no patriotism, and are willing to throw Enlightenment values into the trash can the second that an opportunity to make some additional money comes around? In my view, the reason that wealthy Americans are so disloyal to their own country and its values is simply the fact that the United States has lost any sense of shared culture. The rich people running these multinational corporations identify more as a globalist class that doesn't belong to any particular country. By emphasizing multiculturalism and extreme individualism, and by putting no cultural prohibitions on any sort of lifestyle decision, the United States has lost any sense of culture. This is why you can go to the suburbs of any different city in the United States and everything is corporate, soulless, and exactly like every other place in the United States. Whereas historically, if you looked at United States cities like New Orleans, New York City, Charleston, South Carolina, San Francisco, the cities were unique from one another and had their own distinctive local cultures. Now there's a shell of that remains. San Francisco still looks different from other cities. But other than this old architecture that serves as kind of a remnant from a previous era, there really is not much differences between these cities and their outlying metropolitan areas anymore. And if there's no culture, then there's nothing to be patriotic about. There's nothing to be loyal to. There's no point in celebrating the values of America when America doesn't really seem to exist as a culture. It's just more of a place where you can buy things. As a result of this, the United States will continue to be cucked by China, just like Europe is getting cucked by Islam. Islam and China both represent actual cultures. There are things that those cultures say are prohibited, unlike in the United States where nothing is prohibited and therefore there's no shared values amongst the people. When a culture comes into contact with something that is a lack of a culture, it's only to be expected that the culture would dominate over the lack of culture. And that's exactly what's happening to the West. Increasingly, our consumer products, especially ones that involve creativity and exist for entertainment, things like big Hollywood movies, video games, television shows, things like that, are in the future increasingly going to be designed in ways to ensure that China is not offended by the products. Now, the original idea behind offshoring all of these manufacturing jobs to China would be that if China went capitalist, that over time it would be transformed into a liberal democracy. But the exact opposite is what's going to actually happen. Over time, China increasingly seeps more and more money out of the United States, and it increasingly exercises its authority over what sort of cultural products that the United States can output. So it's not that China is going to become more like the United States, more of a liberal individualist country, but it's actually going to become the opposite. The United States is going to become more subservient to China, given the fact that China has a culture, has citizens that are loyal and patriotic and believe in the values that China has, whereas the United States doesn't have a culture, doesn't have citizens, especially in positions of power and influence, who are patriotic or loyal or have any stake in the values of the United States. The only way to reverse this trend is to try and imbue some sort of culture back into the United States. And in order to do that, it requires setting limits on things. It requires a society that doesn't just focus on individual consumption. Creating a culture like that after it's been completely destroyed by globalist corporations is probably an insurmountable challenge, but it's the only way to avoid becoming completely subservient to China. But as generations of our men become increasingly soy boys, the more likely scenario is that the United States will just continue to get completely cucked by China's big, throbbing, veiny, huge population. If you like this video and you're not already subscribed to my channel, please subscribe.